So what happens when the voice of truth has to speak directly to the highest power in the land? We're diving into a foundational power struggle from ancient Israel, the incredible clash between prophet and king. It's a story all about how a nation's moral compass had to change, from being a guide for everyone to becoming a check on the king himself.
I mean, it's a question every single society has to grapple with, right? And for ancient Israel, the answer brought them to a real breaking point. They found themselves at a massive crossroads, forced to choose between the comfort of a leader they could see and the challenge of trusting an unseen God.
Okay, so where does our story even begin? We're dropping right into the era of the Judges, and trust me, it was a chaotic, rudderless time for Israel. We're talking centuries with no king, no central government, and maybe most importantly, it felt like the phone line to God had just gone dead. And this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the problem. See, Israel still had all the rituals of faith. They had priests, they had sacrifices, they had a sanctuary. But that living connection, that prophetic voice from God, it was missing. Their spiritual life was basically rotting from the inside out.
This spiritual vacuum created this really devastating cycle. It was like they were stuck on a loop. First, the people would turn to idols. Then, as a result, they'd get oppressed by their enemies. In all that suffering, they would finally cry out to God for help, and God would send a temporary rescuer, a judge. But as soon as things got stable again, boom, the cycle would start all over. It was a nation stuck on a treadmill, just going nowhere fast.
And right into this silence, a boy named Samuel is born. His very name means heard by God, because his life was literally an answer to his mother Hannah's desperate prayer. He grew up in the sanctuary itself, positioned from birth to be the one who would finally break that silence.
And with Samuel, the role of the prophet is about to get a massive upgrade. He's not just a voice in the wilderness, he's a national leader who's going to guide Israel out of the chaotic age of judges and into the brand new age of kings.
Man, Samuel's leadership was a total shock to the system. He went all over the country calling for a return to God, telling them to get rid of their idols. And you know what? It actually worked. Israel experienced this genuine spiritual renewal, and with it came military success. For the first time in centuries, it looked like the cycle was finally truly broken.
But then came the twist. The people saw Samuel getting old, and fear started to creep in. Their trust in this unseen God just began to wobble. They looked at all the nations around them with their powerful kings and their big armies and basically said, "Hey, we want one of those." They demanded a king they could actually see, a symbol of strength that would make them like all the other nations. And this, right here, this is the absolute heart of the conflict. Their request wasn't just some political reshuffling. Oh no, it was a theological earthquake. By asking for a king, they were fundamentally rejecting who they were supposed to be as a nation.
And God's words to Samuel just lay it all bare. He basically says, Samuel, don't take it personally. This isn't about you. They're not rejecting your leadership. They are rejecting me as their king. Wow. They were trading divine guidance for a human institution.
And this really shows you the trade-off they were making. On the one side, you have God's unseen rule, a system built entirely on trust and a unique spiritual identity. But on the other side, you've got the visible king they were clamoring for, a system built on human power, military might, and the heavy burdens of taxes and drafting soldiers. Samuel warned them what it would cost, but they still chose the king.
This simple, powerful statement from God to Samuel becomes the lens through which this entire next chapter unfolds. It perfectly sets up the huge contrast between the first king the people get and the second king that God chooses. So, Samuel anoints two kings. First, you've got Saul. He was the king the people wanted. Tall, impressive, he looked the part, but his heart was impulsive and ultimately disobedient. And then you have the king God chose, David, a young shepherd totally overlooked by everyone. He was anointed in secret, not for what he looked like on the outside, but for the condition of his heart on the inside. And when Samuel finally confronts Saul for his disobedience, he delivers this unforgettable line. It becomes a foundational principle for prophecy from this point on. Religious performance, all the sacrifices in the world, means absolutely nothing without genuine obedience. God rejects Saul as king, and the stage is set for a whole new kind of prophet-king relationship. So this brings us to the next phase. With a king now firmly on the throne, the role of the prophet has to evolve again. The danger is no longer chaos from the outside, but the corruption that comes from unchecked power on the inside.
And two key figures step into this brand new role, the prophets Gad and Nathan.
Now, these guys aren't national leaders rallying the people like Samuel was. Their mission field is the palace itself. They operate as King David's advisors, his spiritual guides, and most importantly, as his royal conscience.
So here we see Nathan acting as a kind of theological architect. He delivers this incredible promise from God known as the Davidic covenant. God promises David that his royal line will last, that his son will build a temple, and that one day one of his descendants will reign forever. This becomes the bedrock of all future hope in Israel. But then comes David's greatest moral failure, his adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband Uriah. The king who is chosen for his heart has now become corrupt. And this creates the ultimate test for a royal prophet. Do you dare confront an all-powerful king about his sin? Nathan does. He goes to David and brilliantly tells him a story about a rich man who steals a poor man's only beloved lamb. When David, absolutely furious at the injustice, declares the rich man should die, Nathan points his finger right at the king and delivers 4 of the most devastating words in history. You are the man. It is just an unbelievable moment of prophetic courage.
But the story doesn't just end with condemnation. David completely breaks. He repents, deeply and genuinely. And this reveals the ultimate goal of prophecy. It's not to destroy, but to restore. Nathan's confrontation wasn't about tearing down the king. It was about calling him back to God, even though the painful consequences of his sin would still linger for years.
So, as we start to wrap this up, what we're seeing is a clear and really critical evolution, from a guy like Samuel to guys like Nathan and Gad. The prophet's job description completely transformed to meet the needs of the moment. Samuel restored the voice of God to a nation that was lost in silence. Then, Nathan and Gad took that same voice and brought it right into the halls of power, making sure that no king, not even God's chosen one, was above God's law. But guess what? The story and the evolution of the prophet, it doesn't end here, not by a long shot. As Israel's future kings become even more corrupt and the nation itself splits apart, the prophetic role is going to have to change all over again. It's going to move out of the palace and into the public square. The voice will no longer be a whisper in the king's ear, but a shout in the streets for all to hear.
And so, this ancient story leaves us with a question that feels incredibly modern, doesn't it? When power becomes deaf to truth, who finds the courage to speak it? Who is willing to be that voice, no matter what it costs them?